They're all in now or no? Still?
Yep, in a minute they're joining.
Yeah. So, welcome to this seminar, which has its focus on the relevance and the usefulness of the CONSORT-C and the SPIRIT-C efforts, which have been coordinated by, I call it the Canadian group. So Martin and Baba were leading in this effort. And the intention of today's meeting is rather to reach out to, let's say, the research community, to interact with the research community, and to hear from the first and the final author to better understand what has been done, why it has been done, and how it can impact our practices. I'm Karel Lagarde, and I will give you a short introduction into the topic of today's intervention. This is a webinar of a series which are coordinated within EPTRI, and EPTRI is a European pediatric research infrastructure, a conglomerate of research institutions mainly, but also some parent-related organizations and another type of groups which are active in the field of pediatric clinical research. And we try to improve the field. And this way, it's quite obvious that that also SPIRIT-C and CONSORT-C are very useful tools to really improve research practices and likely also research impact. I personally perceive myself to be a simple mind, and if we do something, you have to know what have we done, how have we done, and the most important question is obviously why are we doing that, and this is what we will try to reflect on during the current meeting. Just to give you some structure of the session, we will, after my introduction, we will have the patient perspective, and this actually does reflect the why. Why are we doing that? Because it's because we want to have more robust data and more useful information on patients, and therefore we have to have them on board from the very beginning onwards and not afterwards go back to them. This will be followed by a reflection on the SPIRIT-C section, which will be guided and introduced by Martin Offringa, and then it will be followed by a CONSORT-C session that will be guided and introduced by Amy Baba. And then if everything goes well, we will have an interactive discussion with two panel groups and with a closing remark. Important is this side of the slide because we will have interactive live polls.
Karel, sorry,
yes?
you are not sharing actually?
So
not? I thought you were just introducing all the general topics, but you are not sharing?
Oh, sorry, you should have told me earlier.
I thought that you were just introducing essentially the general topics, but now you are sharing.
So this is the structure of what we will do today, starting the patient perspective, SPIRIT-C, CONSORT-C, and then to end up with closing remarks. Important, and the first interactive live poll will be launched, is also to learn what your experiences are with these type of guidelines, and then specific, obviously, challenges related to SPIRIT-C and CONSORT-C. Welcome any questions. Obviously, because of logistics reasons, we only will apply the chat function. I will give some time after the first, the second, the third, and potentially also at the end to have some questions that we can reflect on. I think that we are preaching for a community which already are convinced that pediatric medicine and pediatric therapy has a specific framework, and that simple extrapolation obviously fails because of a lot of aspects which are specific to pediatrics. And as a consequence, also some reports on clinical trials and systematic reviews or meta-analyses are not meeting these needs because we simply need tailored tools to really fully implement the parents and patient perspective into these aspects and really fully implement the pediatric aspect of the research questions. We are simply confirming that we have we still need a lot of these type of research tools to really improve the field and make the clinical trials and the results more impactful, more useful, and more relevant for patients, parents, and us as care providers. This will come up in next presentations as well, so I will not further elaborate on that, but a very structured approach has been taken for both the SPIRIT-C as well as for the CONSORT-C development. And as you likely all know, these both efforts have been published recently in different relevant journals. And perhaps also important to realize that there is also additional guidance on how to use these type of tools specific in the BMG, where we do provide also papers with illustrations on how to apply them. This has been received quite positive, as you can see among this one as an announcements of the Lancet group. And obviously a key part is involvement of patients and family caregivers into this type of analysis to really create impactful data and useful data for future use. And depending on who you are, depending on what your background is, these type of things can be used for people who develop trial protocols, for people who conduct clinical trials, but obviously down to or up to patients, public, and trial participants. So in this way, this is a crucial type of statement, a crucial type of data and approaches taken to improve the research field. So as I alluded to at the beginning, this is on the why. And why do we do this? Is simply because we want to make clinical trial reports more useful, especially for those who can benefit from that. And this is obviously the patients and their parents. And so this introduction is rather intended to give you some framework on why we are here and why this is perceived to be a useful and valuable effort. And I hereby would like to introduce, would like to introduce Jennifer, Jennifer Preston, which is hopefully able to stay connected because we had some some technical hiccups related to that. Jennifer Preston, I already know her for quite some time as a very dedicated and committed colleague as a public involvement policy manager at the University of Liverpool with specific interests in patients, families, and the public. So I think she's perfectly placed to bring the patient and parent perspective into this both SPIRIT as well as CONSORT guidelines. So I would like to hand over to Jennifer. Please do not forget to vote if you haven't done so, so that at the end of the presentation of Jennifer, that we can see a little bit where we are with the poll for the first type of questions. Jennifer, can you take over and can you hear us?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Jennifer, just to a very brief point, I'm launching now the poll because we have a lot of people which are basically entering the meeting. So as Karel was saying, there will be essentially 3 different polls in this webinar. The first one will be the one that you are about to see, that I'm launching now, essentially, and you can essentially vote for these during the speech of Jennifer, and then you can also bring in some question after her basically presentation. So just to add this point. And please, Jennifer, of course, now.
Can you share the slides, please, Daniel?
Absolutely. I'm about to do that indeed. Okay, you should see the screen, and now you can also see in presentation mode. Can you see, Olof?
Yes.
Jennifer, can you?
Yes.
You can start.
Thank you. Yeah. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Carol. That's lovely of you to introduce me that way. So apologies, everybody. I am having major technical problems, so hopefully I can get through this session. But good afternoon, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to speak with you today about involving young people and families in the development of these reporting guidelines. Next slide, please. So first of all, I would like to say a big thank you to my colleagues, Amy, who's on the call, and Maureen Smith, who led this fantastic work. I was just lucky with my colleagues to be invited along as part of the international steering group to work with our young people across different parts of the globe, and I'll share that with you shortly. So this was a real opportunity for us to work with young people and families in the development of these reporting guidelines, which was quite unique. I don't think young people, and especially, have been invited to be involved in such work before. So from the very beginning, young people have been involved. So next slide, please. So even before any work commenced, Amy and Maureen actually consulted with a group of young people in Canada to see whether young people would like to be involved, but also how they could be involved. And then at that point, they were involved in every stage of the process, as Carol actually described before, but obviously from planning and design. They were involved. Actually, the planning and design took place before the item generation, and that's when I think the young people got involved. But correct me if I'm wrong, Amy. Then they obviously got involved in the generating of the candidate report and items, and then the Delphi process itself. And you can clearly see in the different colour coding where young people and families were involved. So they were involved where feasible right the way through. And that was made possible through two formal groups. One was a youth advisory group made up of 6 young people aged between 13 to 19. And there was a family caregiver group made up of 5 caregivers. Each members brought different expertise to the project. So they either had lived experience of participating in trials, they had experience using research to inform decision making, or experience of collaborating as partners in research. And critically, their involvement was flexible. So recognising different capacities and interests, life stages, right the way throughout the project, which turned out to be really important as those working with patients and families, especially young people now. So next slide, please. So this is where me and my colleagues from Spain, Scotland and France came in. So we're part of a European Young Persons Advisory Group network set up several years ago. And we founded this network to basically collaborate with children, families, in academics, industry and so on, to make sure that young people especially had a voice in paediatric clinical trial design. So I've known Martin for many, many years, and his team contacted us and said, would you like to be a part of these working groups so that we can get young people involved in the development of the guidelines. So after many meetings with the core team, we decided we would hold 2 workshops with 5 groups of young people in our groups. And one was to focus on the SPIRIT-C and one was to focus on CONSORT-C. But that took a lot of planning from our side in terms of how to make the workshops accessible to young people so that they understood what it was all about. So 42 young people aged 10 to 21 took part in the first workshop and 41 attended the second workshop. Next slide, please. Sorry, this shows you where those groups were based, and how many of those how many young people took part in each of those sessions. Next slide. So the the young people's groups and the young people and caregiver workshops, they've made a huge impact to this project, and they focused in on aspects that are really important to them as young people and families. So they really focused in on family and patient-centered practice. So they looked at and addressed issues of consent and assent processes, pain reduction and reducing potential harms. In terms of SPIRIT-C, they produced 17 new reporting items, including 4 youth-generated and 6 youth-endorsed items. In terms of CONSORT-C, 13 new reporting items, including 1 youth-generated item and 6 youth-endorsed items were produced. So this is a real impact to these reporting guidelines, and the young people and the families felt really included and involved throughout the whole process. Next slide, please. But it also generated lessons for us as patient and public involvement practitioners, because this was the first time that young people, like I said, and families were involved in the development of the reporting guidelines. And our paper was published about this work last year, and it goes into the detail, in a little bit more detail than what I've just said, in terms of how Amy and Maureen delivered this, and how we were involved in that, and more importantly, the lessons learned. So here's the 6 lessons learned from our work. Obviously, having designated people like Maureen and Amy to go to speak to about the processes was really important. Training young people and families were trained at every aspect of the project. There was easy access to all project materials to be involved, clear expectations on time commitment and compensation, structured check-in meetings with teams, and I think what I mentioned before in terms of flexibility, making sure that the meetings were planned around young people's and families' time, and then demonstrated the openness to feedback. Every stage of that process was evaluated and fed back to the young people, so the feedback loops were there right from the start. So hopefully that's captured the patient's involvement in this project, and I'm sure there'll be many questions, but thank you for your time.
Thank you for highlighting the relevance of involvement of patients and families into this type of development of guidelines, as well as into obviously clinical trials themselves. This presentation is now open for questions, but I couldn't see any yet in the chat. I personally would like to stress a little bit the diversity in answers to the just closed poll, where we have a little bit a very diverse assessment of people who regularly use this type of guidelines until people who have never been exposed to this kind of guidelines. So it's quite interesting, and does suggest that we have a very diverse background of people on this meeting. So it's good to reach out to people who already have experiences with these guidelines, as well as people who are new to this specific field. But if we don't have any questions yet, please feel free to raise them later onwards and use the chat function. And I now would like to hand over to Martin, if I recall well, for the next part of this webinar. Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Karel, and thank you to EPTRI for this invitation. Hello, everybody from Toronto in Canada. My name is Martin Offringa. I'm a pediatrician and a clinical trialist. And I had the privilege to be the principal investigator for this project and to chair the consensus committees. And I did that with a large team. And you've seen the names. The speakers today are all co-authors of the final papers that were published at the end of February in the British Medical Journal, in Lancet Child and Adolescent Health, and here in North America, JAMA Pediatrics. So in this session, I will go into a few details and items that are part of the reporting standard for pediatric trial protocols. And why is that important? Because trial protocols are actually the blueprint of what we're going to do, what we're going to measure, how we're going to measure, who's involved, when, where, how, etc., etc. And I think every good trial starts with a good protocol. And you see more and more journals being interested in publishing trial protocols. But I've also learned that children and their families use and read protocols to see if they are interested to become a participant in a trial. So I think the information in Spirit for Children is relevant, of course, for people that are going to do the trial, also for maybe centers that are invited to join a multi-center trial to see the protocol, and they are looking for specific information. But last but not least at all, it's the participants and the people who make the trial a reality. That's the children and their families want to see the protocol too. And I've had in my own career people saying, thank you, Dr. Martin, for inviting us, but we're not interested in your trial because we don't like the outcome that you're measuring, and we can't actually come back every week for the outcome, etc. So patients are co-designing studies now, but they're also co-judging whether this trial has everything it takes to be successful. Okay, so let's go to a few introductory slides to just repetition probably. So the whole aim was, of course, to try and deliver information to end users of trials, and the end users of trials that involve children and adolescents, and hence, the title. We had actually several discussions about, is this Spirit and Consort for Children or for pediatrics, and we ended on children and adolescents. And there are many trials, of course, in the adolescent age going on everywhere in the world. As was already mentioned by Jen, and thanks Jen for joining us today from Liverpool, 17 new reporting items on top of what actually was already there in Spirit 2025, published last summer. And 30 new items, which Ami will go into a little bit more detail for the CONSORT, which is the reporting standard for trials that have been finalized. So it's the final reports. Youth generated means that the youth workshops brought forward items that we didn't think of, that were not used in the literature, and that all the experts had never thought about. So that really were new items that the youth brought forward. And they brought many more items. Endorsed means that the items were already identified by the team, but then the youth brought them up without knowing that. So we didn't feed our children and the young people any information. It was all spontaneous from scratch for them. But for us, that was an endorsement of 6 other items that we already had on the radar. This is just a distribution. So these reporting standards are divided into section and topics. So first, in the title, we would like people to indicate that this is a trial in children and in adolescents, and maybe even give their age. And then a few items that are very specific for children in the background and rationale in the protocol. I'll focus on this column now because we're in the SPIRIT-C part of today, and so on. And you see that some things were not relevant for the CONSORT because they were really about the protocol and the thing, how things are going to happen, etc., and vice versa. But otherwise, I just want to mention that all new items were really harmonized between the 2 standards, one for the protocols and one for the final report, so that if you ask it here at the end of the trial, then it's also been asked at the design part of the trial, so that these items are harmonized. We gave in the paper a box talking about the structure of these reporting guidelines and how best to use them. So this is, you can read that later, but this is all, you know, for people that are first-time users. Actually, we describe who the intended users are. Actually, protocol authors, journal editors, publishers, peer reviewers that want to check your protocol before they accept it for publication. But even funders, ethics committees are interested in details, and so there's a lot of people that have interest and are interest holders here. We offer additional tools for you guys if you want to write your protocol according to SPIRIT-C. There are fileable checklists on the web which you can download, and there's additional tip sheets and stuff that we will show you. This actually is the tip sheet for SPIRIT item 16.1 on outcomes, which actually is in the SPIRIT list, is somewhere here in the middle. And you see that the item is entitled Explanation of the Validity, Reliability, Feasibility and Responsiveness of the Outcome Measurement Instrument for that pre-specified age groups. This, of course, speaks to what everybody on the call has seen, that we are seeing that people use in their trial an outcome measurement instrument or a scale, or even a patient-reported outcome that was designed for adults and now is used in children. But we really want to know if that instrument generates more signal than noise. So we're asking about some of these measurement properties that are important before you actually decide that this is a good tool to be used in that age group. And then again, you know, the whole idea of the meaningful outcome and meaningful to children and parents and families, you know, is going throughout there. And then, of course, you see here, and again, this is Ami's domain in a few minutes, but then this is harmonized with item 14.1 in CONSORT. And you find that here, of course, methods, outcomes. And then again, you justify the relevance and importance. And these are all the key elements that, you know, people, and I skipped that here. These are the key elements that people are looking for in your report. So you can use these bullets to make sure that you don't forget to report any of the key elements for that particular reporting item. All right, so here I'm diving into the first item that we felt is very specific. So as I said, last year, SPIRIT for all trials, or for trials in adults, I say, was published. And item 9A was scientific background, rationale, including summary of relevant studies, whether published and unpublished, examining the benefits and harm for each intervention. So this is a true background item that SPIRIT asked, but we added 3 sub-items. Describe the prevalence and incidence of the disease or condition in children and adolescents. That was a strong item that people voted in, because that usually lacks, and then the readers are not sure whether this is a big problem or not so big problem. Describe the potential for extrapolation from other pediatric populations to or from adult data, and of course usually, you know, from older children. Now this is this intervention is now tested in younger children or even in newborns, and then we need to sort of understand what the science says about extrapolation, or why it's not considered appropriate. And of course you have pharmacologists like Karel Allegaard that can help you make decisions there. And there's a growing science in where extrapolation to younger children or older children completely fails. So be very explicit about that in your protocol. And then finally, here in this sub-item, include the description of the question, of the research question, with the justification why that actually now needs to be done in this specific group of young children, or why it needs to be done in adolescents. Why can't we just use adult evidence? Why are adolescents so different from the adults that have been tested many times before with the same drug, etc.? So that is sort of the item here. And I would like to take the opportunity and give one of our colleagues, Ed, the floor now. Ed, do you want to talk to a few of these items from these slides?
Yes, thank you, Martin. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. Can I make a couple of general comments? Because I was also slightly surprised, but interested that only about 1 in 5 of the people on the call regularly use Consort and Spirit. So I think if I could say a couple of sentences just about Spirit and Consort, because Spirit is obviously the blueprint, as Carol said, and it's the minimum reporting items for a protocol. And Consort is about reporting the main findings. And again, the minimum reporting guidelines for reporting items in a trial. So basically, Spirit is what you plan to do so other people can learn, copy, understand, replicate, all that sort of thing. And actually Consort is what you did. So they are, you know, one does follow the other. But also, I think when I came into, I started writing guidelines a long time ago, just because there wasn't one. So I was invited to write one. But also in those papers, there are examples and there is methodology, which actually is really important. These are extensions to the originals. So these are specific to certain genres. And so actually the Consort and Spirit extensions are really helpful in terms of methodology, how to do something. So they're not just about reporting, they're quite educational. So I'm a big fan of them. Sorry, I didn't say I'm from Nottingham in England, in the UK. Not everyone's heard of Nottingham, but they may have heard of Robin Hood, one of our rebel heroes, one of the outlaws. Anyway, let's get down to business. So we've selected a couple of examples for each item, and we haven't done every item because some of them are a little bit obvious. But going back to the prevalence and incidence, which is 9A1, what is of interest is reporting a specific incidence or prevalence, because that provides context about the health issue in question, its magnitude, and the paediatric subgroups or groups that are most affected. So what we're interested in, for example, is age, sex, race, ethnicity, and why conducting a trial is important, because then that feeds into justifying the key elements of design. So that might be the inclusion criteria with respect to age and the expected external validity. So what we mean is, when you read a paper that's been published, you look at the inclusion criteria, you look at the patient population and go, yeah, my children or young people are like that. I can apply these results to that population. Thank you, Martin. Yeah, next, the first example actually here is describing, this is to do with describing the potential for extrapolation from other pediatric or adult populations, and why, and if it is not considered appropriate, why, and if it is, what did you do? So here's quite a nice example from McBride et al. So they were doing a trial of dressings in pediatric split thickness skin grafts. I'm a statistician, so by background, so I may use the medical terms, but I don't always understand them. Forgive me for that. But they were very honest here, and I like, this is good reporting, and it's quite hard to find good examples of good reporting and good methodology. Sometimes people report what they did beautifully, but what they did was crazy. So this is good reporting and probably good methodology. So they say the majority of studies are performed in adults, and it's tempting to extrapolate, but why not? You know, why do another trial? But we have to justify it to do it in a pediatric setting, and they say it's not entirely appropriate. And they point out that children's skin is different to adults. Its thickness varies by site, age, and gender. They don't mention ethnicity, which I think in some genres is quite important as well when you come to skin. And therefore, trials in children may not have the same results as those in adults. So that's really, I think, a really nice introduction of why they did this study and why they say you can't just extrapolate from adults. Next slide, please. Lovely. And here's an example of the third item. So a description of the research question or aim with a justification, again, for undertaking the trial in children and adolescents. And this is slightly correlated with the previous item, obviously, and this goes over 2 slides, but basically it's, and it was quite, and actually a lot of the, in the explanation and elaboration paper, there's some very long examples, but they don't lend themselves very to go onto slides. But here they explain why this is a trial of yoga, some sort of yoga intervention in children and adolescents with irritable bowel syndrome. So they say a number of reasons underlie the focus on 14 to 26-year-olds. They They say that they are likely to experience similar developmental challenges, and all the adjustments in sense of self, family, schooling, and peers are basically growing. And their target age range, they say, reflect the peak IBS prevalence that remains relatively consistent. But they do say, and this is really good reporting because this is what is in the item description, that the rates do change. They go up from about 8% earlier in childhood to about adult levels of about 15%. Next slide, please, Martin. So they go on to say, and this is really good background, if you don't know anything about IBS symptoms, and I don't, they suggest a developmental shift in the illness around adolescence. Therefore, they're justifying the age range that they've done it in, and they anticipated that there'll be similar benefits for adults and adolescents and young adults across the age group studied. So they clearly point out very nicely why they've gone into this sort of patient population really nicely. Thank you, Martin. I think that's the end of that example.
Thanks, Ed. That's great. Thank you for that. Let's just move on to another section of the checklist here and talk about, of course, interventions in trials. The first column I just put on the slide here is from SPIRIT 2025, published last summer, where they are talking about describe the intervention and comparator. So both the experimental intervention and the comparator intervention with sufficient detail to allow replication, including how, when, etc., by whom, where, whatever, etc. Then there's an item about discontinuation or modifying allocated intervention during the trial, strategies to improve adherence to the intervention. Sometimes that is relevant, sometimes not so relevant. But at the protocol stage, it's really important to consider that because otherwise your trial, if people are not receiving or taking the intervention, then your trial is wasted. And then the concomitant care that is permitted. So that's another big hot topic, in reporting world, that people don't describe very clearly what drugs, can be used in the experimental and in the comparator arm on top of the study medication and etc. So, but we, the group that built the extensions here, had three sub items for the first 15A1. Describe whether there's an intervention dose and or formulation appropriate for the trial population, and if there are any adjustment made based on age, weight, or body surface. You can see here that there are two items in one already, and we did that for efficiency. But of course, these speak, when we're talking about drug interventions, these speak, of course, to the developmental pharmacology, the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics that we've learned so much about. Give a rationale for adapting interventions used in other pediatric population or adults, So you adapt it for the small infants or for the toddlers. Give the rationale. Why did you do that? And then also, how did you do it? And finally, 15A.3, describe whether the trial interventions will be delivered with help from a support person. And here I think this was one of these items that was generated by the youth themselves, because they wanted to know, if I'm in that trial, do I always need daddy or mommy to help me taking the intervention, if it's an injection or if it's, doing something physically that's complex. So I wanted to sort of invite Nina now to come on the stage. Introduce yourself, where you are. That's the code today, Nina. I have no idea where you're from, given your name, so you have to tell us. And then maybe you want to speak to some of these items and the examples. Nina.
Thank you so much, Martin. I'm employed at Newcastle University in the UK, but actually at the moment today I'm in Finland, so I'm looking out into the garden at the moment. So very nice to be on this webinar. And like Ed, I thought it was very interesting that most people said they are not maybe yet extensively using the generic SPIRIT or CONSORT guidelines. And my background is in allied health and occupational therapy, mainly in community-based interventions. So coming to this working group very much from the kind of non-drugs, non-medicines point of view. And so from the beginning, I had a strong interest in the intervention items, because that's often the sort of gap. You know, there might be really good research going on, but actually how well was the intervention articulated at the beginning? How clearly was it made, or was it then just kind of post hoc explained that actually this is what we ended up doing? So the point of the generic SPIRIT items is to try to encourage all of us to make the intervention as clear as possible from the beginning. We might end up changing it, but at least we've said this is how we think the intervention is going to play out, and this is what we're trying to deliver here. Now, those of you, you know, including myself, when there has been an intervention published and a trial completed, you then go and read about what did the people do. And often in the children's intervention, you find out that you can only read about the bit that was done directly to the child by the healthcare professional. But as you start to think about how might we roll this out in my service, you start to realize that there's probably about 70% that isn't told. That's about that wider sort of care and support package, maybe the adaptations, adjustments that need to be made. And I think that's what these three new extension items are sort of trying to articulate. And building on to what Martin and Ed were saying, so in the published SPIRIT-C, there are sort of two elements to them. There's the SPIRIT-C main kind of description and the checklist, and then there's the examples and explanations. And one thing that I think for the intervention items, if you go in and look at those explanations and examples, you find a really, really good diverse list of examples. There are examples from, you know, obviously sort of medicines, but there's also dynamic stretching, there's virtual reality, there's goal setting, you know, there's physical activity. So there's a whole range of, you know, prevention, you know, different kind of therapies as well as medicines. So there's really a bit like what Ed was saying, there's really good examples for now us to build on and make the pre-trial reporting of the interventions better. So as Martin already said, the first item focused on sort of the tailoring of the intervention to the particular age or weight developmental group. Then the second item, if you flip on the next slide, Martin, the second item is about the giving the rationale for adapting the intervention. And like Ed was saying before, here's, you know, just one of the many examples that are in the fuller guideline about how these authors have articulated the need for why adaptation is needed. And then they've given that key rationale. And I think when you do go in after the webinar, you know, if you've not done it yet, when you go in and look at these examples, what you start to realize is that a lot of this stuff is thinking that when we start the research project, it's tacit in our minds because we know the field, we've got the theory and we've got the hypothesis in our mind. But actually, when we come to complete the trial, people don't know that. And so articulating these things in advance, that's what the SPIRIT is trying to do. If you move on to the next slide, Martin. So then the third intervention item is describing whether trial interventions will be delivered with the help from a support person. And I think, you know, like Martin said earlier on about the youth themselves came up with this, but this is, you know, if we think of the younger children and the middle childhood especially, most of the interventions have some kind of other person, often a parent or a carer or somebody else helping the child with it. So this is really inviting and encouraging us to make those other people visible too, and making it clear what was the wider support to make that intervention happen. And then just one more slide is really to flag that obviously today's webinar is about the SPIRIT and the CONSORT guidelines, but very closely linked to the intervention items is the TIDIER, the template for intervention description and replication. And there's now the children and adolescent version of that too. Again, thanks to Martin's group for leading on that. And this is really a very sort of complementary, comprehensive guideline that you can all use, and we certainly actively use, to really try to articulate what the different intervention components were. So if you're not familiar with that yet, I definitely encourage you to look that up too. So back to you, Martin.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nina. Yeah, this is the TIDIER-C published last summer as well, which you can download as a separate, but it's completely integrated in SPIRIT for Children and in CONSORT for Children. We had one item about outcomes in SPIRIT. Obviously, SPIRIT 25 asks for the description of the primary and the secondary outcome, including the specific measurement variable. So what is the domain? Example, blood pressure. Analysis metric, a change from baseline, or a final value, or a time to event. A method of aggregation for the individual child in the study. Are we going to use the median or the proportion of events, and time point for each outcome? This is really what SPIRIT asks, and on top of that, we added an explanation again of the validity, reliability, feasibility, I mentioned that before, and responsiveness. So these measurement property of your outcome measurement instruments, or your scale, or your checklist, or your PROM, your patient reported outcome measure. Chris couldn't make it, I think. Ed, do you wanna chime in again and expand a little bit on the outcomes, which to me actually are so super important in trials. If the outcome is the wrong outcome, your trial is wasted. Correct? Do you agree with me?
Totally. Oh gosh, totally. Could you go back one slide, please? Just yeah, I just wanted to, because conscious that we all, myself especially, maybe get into jargon, so I may try and explain a couple of these terms. But you're absolutely right. This is key. One of the key, the patients, interventions, comparators, outcomes. This is one of the pillars of a randomized controlled trial. And if you get this wrong, you're scuppered. So yeah, one of the key pillars of this is a description of the outcome measurements used, including their known, and this goes into the extension, validity, reliability, feasibility, and responsiveness. So validity is, does it actually, whatever you're using to measure something, does it actually give you an accurate result? Reliable means, I guess, you're measuring something today. Is the measurement error? But also, if you measured it tomorrow, would it be different? Does it give you reliable results? Feasibility, we're dealing with, my background is perinatal, so it's mainly neonatal and very young children. But if even going through the age ranges into adolescence, is it feasible to ask this child to do this or measure this on a child of that age? Because quite often, myself included, I have conversations with chief investigators about why are we measuring 10 different things, 3 of which measure the same thing almost. There's a burden on the participant, and that's where Jennifer, the patient and public involvement is really important, because we can come up with a list of outcomes that's as long as your arm, but actually what we're doing is prodding and poking someone potentially. So we have to be really careful to keep it down to the minimum important outcomes that show that this intervention that we're testing works. And responsiveness is it responsive to change? If you measure it 2 times over a period of time and the condition has improved, will the measurement show that? So next slide, please. So this is specifically about validity. So this is a really nicely reported study by Brorson, and they're looking at this is a great title, an empowerment-inspired intervention, whatever that is. I don't know, but they're really clear. I don't know what that empowerment-inspired intervention means, but read the text. Brilliantly, beautifully described, very clear. We're going to use DISAB Kids, Check Your Health, the Diabetes Family Conflict Scale, and the Swedish Diabetes Empowerment Scale. So, and they say that DISAB Kids measures the generic health of children with chronic illnesses with a module for diabetes, good reliability and validity, with a reference. Check Your Health, been tested on adults and adolescents, and has been shown to good validity, and it is being validated on young persons with type 1 diabetes. So it might not be already validated in that patient population, but there's good adult data and adolescent data showing that it is reliable and valid. So why wouldn't it be necessarily in the younger population? But it does need validating. And then also translated and validated on young persons with type 1 diabetes. So beautifully referenced and described what's going on. You know what they're going to do, basically. Next slide, please. And here's another nice example as well. So this is a home-based exercise program for children with congenital heart disease, and they're measuring functional independence level with something called the WFIM, which is functional independence measure. And they say a psychometrically sound instrument in terms of reliability, validity, and responsiveness with a reference. And they mention the age groups as well. So it's really good reporting, and they're basically saying we're using this tool and this is why it's a good tool, and hopefully whatever it measures is sound as well. Thank you, Martin.
That's amazing.
Sorry, this is no, I knew there was a third thing. Well, okay. Also, not only who's assessing each outcome is really important, but when as well, because obviously you have to specify the time point of key primary outcome, as we call it. When are you measuring this primary outcome? But who is really important as well, because there are, from my own experience in neonates, obviously they're babies, they don't talk, they don't give much away. So we have to sort of work out what's going on there. But most of my neonatal trials at age 2, we can tell major deficits, so walking, talking, seeing, and hearing, we can pick up major deficits. But even better, in a trial of therapeutic hypothermia for birth asphyxia, about 6-7 years old, we got school teachers and parents to report. So what matters is obviously it's important if children and adolescents can report their own experiences, we need to hear from them, because that, they are the participants, and the results of this trial will be applied to future people of their age. So we need to know. This is commonly done for subjective outcomes, but obviously age and developmentally appropriate validated instruments are necessary, with simplified languages and visual aids as well. We need to make it as simple for people to fill it in or whatever they're doing. So there's obviously self-reported. There are proxies. There are parents, maybe carers, maybe teachers, where you just can't, or it's difficult or not possible to assess that outcome. So a proxy might be used, but again, there are methods to mitigate any bias. And clinician reported outcomes as well, obviously, scores and scales and things like that. So basically, tell us what you're planning on doing, tell us what you're going to use, tell us why you're using it, and explain it to the point where Nina beautifully explained, so somebody can actually go away, understand what you've done, and maybe replicate it, and become, we should mention common COMETs, the common outcome data sets. It's good to measure outcomes consistently across a genre of trials, so we can compare the results in similar or the same populations as well. So there are core outcome sets as well that we need to consider. Thank you, Martin.
Great, thank you so much, Ed. And for the viewers, this table 4 comes from the accompanying explanation and elaboration paper that was published in British Medical Journal as well. It's all open access. You can download it. It's 35 pages with examples, tables, and tools for you to use. And we're staying a little bit in the E&E document. And I just want to go to Central Europe, I think. I'm not sure where Pete is. Pete, can you speak to this and to this item 17?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Piet Leroy is my name. I'm a pediatrician in Maastricht University Hospital. This is in the southeast of the Netherlands, very close to Germany and Belgium. Thank you for being able to be part of this, and just a few words given the time on an extension on the level of the topic of harms related to interventions. I think we were all used to relating harms of interventions to the intervention itself, for example, the side effects of a drug at study. But now actually a very important extension was made. This is the 17.1 especially, where we now actually ask researchers to describe whether trial interventions and or procedures will induce fear, pain, distress, and or invasive, and what measures are taken to mitigate this. And this is based on an increasing body of literature showing that medical care comes with a lot of stress in children, the pain, the anxiety, the fear, sometimes the holding down, and this is not harmless. It causes short-term as well as long-term negative effects on children, like loss of trust, anticipatory anxiety, and sometimes even traumatic memories. And when it comes to interventions, this is not only about the intervention itself, but also the procedures that might be needed to measure the intervention, like, for example, blood sampling that is associated with pharmacological research, for example. So if we move on to the next slide, Martin. Yeah, and the next one. Yeah, so here are two examples actually, and so what we want researchers to do now is to describe in detail whether these trial interventions or procedures, how fearful and painful they are, and especially what measures are taken to mitigate this. And here's an example from a recent study where researchers not only describe that they used a topical anesthetic medication, but that they actually also used age-appropriate distraction techniques. So it's not only about an intervention on its own, it's also about behaving as adults next to children in an age-appropriate way, giving them the psychological safety. And this is very close to a recently published international guideline on which rights children actually have in the context of medical procedures. And one of those rights is the right to be treated respectfully, with all attention for psychological and emotional safety and respecting fundamental children's rights. So this is a nice example actually how it should be done. And maybe the other example, which is on the next slide. This is like also a little bit more delicate study on the use of Pentrox, which is an inhaled methoxyflurane. In the emergency room it's used. It's also called the green whistle. It's an acute analgesia strategy. And here they do a placebo compared study, which is delicate, but actually what they say is that participants and parents are advised that rescue analgesia is immediately available, for example, intranasal fentanyl. So just to make sure that in the placebo group, where you don't use the methoxyflurane, that at least another pain strategy is immediately available. And I think that's an extremely important addition to this SPIRIT guideline. So I will keep it here, Martin, given the time. And
thank you. Yeah, we need to move on. It's amazing. Thanks so much, and I'll hand it back to you, Karel.
Martin, maybe we have the time just for the poll, so we can maybe have
because
some
the first poll was quite informative to all of us, so for sure. And perhaps I may, in the meanwhile, ask Pete if you have good references that are easily available. Please paste them also in the chat so that people can read the guidelines you refer to, if it's possible. And there are 5 questions now for those who's working on that.
Of course, if you have questions or also for the pool, if something can trigger some curiosity to the basically to the presenters, please don't hesitate to add something and to put something in the chat.
20 responses now of the pool, so
Let's wait, I would say.
yeah, it's going up still.
Couple of minutes more. It is of course completely anonymous, so absolutely just put it down your replies. That will help us to basically have a more important discussion, to comment, to understand basically what could be done also in terms of the implementations.
I'm not sure if Martin wants to still comment on that because you were leading the SPIRIT-C section. But again, there seems to be, diverse opinions, let's call it this way, on the different responses, with the top replies rarely used for clinical trials at present, lack of awareness as a key issue, the need for patient and parent involvement, that makes me personally happy. And then all of the above equally, what's the greatest training? We all need to be trained in this type of things. And then protocol templates aligned with SPIRIT-C. Any final reflections on that, Martin?
Yeah, all are relevant and there's no big surprises, but it's good to have this sample. And I'm just thinking, what would the world look like in a year from now if we have the same group here?
Yeah.
Can this be changed? So let's talk about implementation during or after the next consort bit.
Yeah, I was also thinking, as Pete was presenting his part, perhaps he can also inform adult trials because they may also suffer.
Many trials fail in children because parents don't like, all the stress and pain. And so if you want to kill your trial, don't think about stress, harm, and pain.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy Pete is here and this is part of our reporting set now.
So that's well done. We will shift from Spirit to Consort, and so more than happy to introduce Amy Baba. Please also inform us as being the first author and therefore pivotal to what all has been generated on your background. And we're happy to listen to your introduction on the CONSORT-C, subsequently followed by some panel reflections. Please, you have the floor.
Hi, Carl and everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Carl, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ami Baba, and as per the introduction by Carl, I'm the first author of the SPIRIT-C CONSORT-C extensions that we are discussing today, and have the privilege of leading this work with Dr. Martin Ofringa and also the other co-authors and many collaborators on this call and also not on this call. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about CONSORT-Children and Adolescents, or CONSORT-C 2026. This is really complementary to the SPIRIT-C 2026 guideline, which was about pediatric trial protocols. So for CONSORT-C 2026, we developed this simultaneously, and it is a minimum set of reporting items for the pediatric final report. So CONSORT-C is really to be used for when you complete your trial and you want to report what was done, what was found, and what the trial results mean. So it adds 13 new items to the CONSORT 2025 guideline, which was published last year, and is for RCTs that involve children and adolescents ages 0 to 19 years. So clear and comprehensive reporting of pediatric-specific trial methods that were implemented in the trial and the results that were generated from the trial will facilitate the proper evaluation, including the generalizability, as well as considering the applicability and in the critical appraisal of the trial methods and findings. So we developed both SPIRIT and CONSORT-C through an international consensus-based process, and complementary to SPIRIT-C for CONSORT-C, there are 13 new items comprising of 1 youth-generated and 6 youth-endorsed items. So a little bit more about the different sections and the different new items that are covered in CONSORT-C here. It is divided up based on the existing section and topics in the CONSORT 2025 guideline. So the new items for CONSORT-C are within the title section, as well as the introduction about the background and the rationale, the methods, the eligibility criteria, the intervention and comparator, outcomes and harms, results such as baseline data and ancillary analyses, but also the discussion. So on the right column here, you could see how many of the new items are in each section, totaling to the 13 new items. Just want to also highlight some of the resources that we developed as part of developing both SPIRIT-C and CONSORT-C. So in Martin's section for SPIRIT-C, we saw these tip sheets. We also developed the tip sheets for the CONSORT-C items to facilitate the understanding and the implementation of the CONSORT-C guidelines. So for all 13 items, we developed these tip sheets that are freely accessible and are available on the SPIRIT and CONSORT-C website. For each tip sheet, there are some key elements to kind of focus on. They are meant to be like quick at-a-glance resources for each item. So at the top, you can see that we present the section of the item and the item numbering, as well as the reporting item itself. You can see the key elements for reporting each item. And then we also provide good reporting examples from published trials. So this is so you can look at how to apply the item in practice and how other people may have also reported it in their own trials as well for reference. In addition to the tip sheets, we also published explanation and elaboration or E&E papers for both guidelines. So for both SPIRIT and CONSORT-C, the E&E papers were published in the BMJ in February of this year. The E&E goes into more detail about each item. So it provides examples as well as detailed explanations and rationale for the importance of reporting each item, and also details the key elements. So everything on the tip sheet is included in the E&E, but the E&E provides more details about why it's important to really include the detail and any evidence that is supporting the item. In addition, in the E&E papers, we provide a glossary of terminology that is used throughout the guidelines. So the glossary is harmonized across both SPIRIT and CONSORT-C, and goes into the definitions of different terminology because there could be variations depending on different geographical areas or specialties. So we wanted to really define our terms. In addition, for CONSORT-C, we elaborate on the 13 new CONSORT-C items, but we also have pediatric considerations and examples of 8 key CONSORT 2025 items that are particularly relevant for pediatric RCTs. So we have more elaborations and pediatric examples for the abstract, as well as patient and public involvement, the intervention and comparator, outcomes and harms, participant flow, and presenting the baseline data and the numbers analyzed outcomes and estimations. So when using SPIRIT and CONSORT-C, we really encourage all users to refer to the checklist, but also this E&E paper to really understand each item and how to apply each item correctly. So in this section, in this CONSORT-C block, I'm going to go over a few examples. So I'll go over 3 CONSORT-C items. Some of these were also covered in SPIRIT-C, so they are complementary items, but I want to kind of highlight how they are applied in trial reporting. So the first item that I will go into for CONSORT-C is CONSORT-C 6.3. This item is in the introduction and the background and rationale. And it extends the CONSORT 2025 item, where authors are asked to provide a scientific background and rationale. But in CONSORT-C for pediatric trials, we ask authors to include a description of the research question or aim with a justification for undertaking the trial in children and adolescents. So this item is important, and the details is important to report because the enrolled population and the rationale and explanation for why a particular population was involved, such as because of their age range or their developmental stage, is key critical details for readers to understand why the trial was conducted and whether the trial is of interest to them or relevant for their purposes. So if we clearly state why a trial was done with the research question and aim and why a specific group of children and adolescents were involved, it could clarify to the readers the choice for a specific age group or the target population. So for example, perhaps it's because there is a high disease prevalence in a certain age group, or because data is lacking in a certain subpopulation and warrants more investigation. So here I am presenting an example from a published trial that has reported item 6.3 well. This trial is a vaccine trial that was conducted in children ages 1 to 8 years. And it addresses the item well in practice because it provides context of the existing evidence, but also the rationale for including this specific age range. So in the blue text here, we could see that the authors clearly describe why the study was conducted in children's ages 1 to 8 years old. So here in the blue text, it says, as the dose and dosing regimen in young children has yet to be elucidated clinically, we performed an age de-escalation study in children in Colombia, Finland, and Panama to assess the safety, tolerability, and immunogenicity of TAC-214. So here we could really see why the trialists involved children ages 1 to 8 years old and why the specific group and the purpose of this trial. The next item that I will elaborate more on is the CONSORT-C 12A.1. This item is in the methods section and is about the eligibility criteria. So it extends the CONSORT number 12A, which is asking authors to provide the eligibility criteria for participants. And in the CONSORT-C extension, we ask authors to provide a justification for including multiple age groups of children and adolescents at different developmental stages and address potential age or development-related differences in treatment effects. So when the trial population that is involved in the trial is diverse, it's important to detail the participants' characteristics and provide a rationale for the included selected age groups or developmental stages because of differences that may exist because of the disease or illness course and in the differences in response to treatment in different age groups and developmental stages. So children are not like one homogeneous group. There are different subpopulations. So younger children may not respond the same to older children to different interventions and treatments. So this context is really important to understand which age groups that the trial is relevant for and how the treatment may affect the population that's involved. So this example is quite long, so I will break it down in terms of how the example addresses the key elements for this item. This example is from a published trial about optimal dosing of intravenous ketamine for procedural sedation in children in the emergency department, and it's an RCT that was published. So breaking it down, this example hits the key elements for the item in blue. So the age groups of the eligible and included participants and the justification on how the selected age range would enable the trial to meet its objective is covered in the, in the second blue section here, when authors state that an RCT comparing the 3 most commonly used ketamine dosing regimens would support or suggest dosage recommendations based on patient age and procedural length. The authors also addressed the specific and defined developmental stages of eligible and included participants. So towards the end of this example here, authors clearly specify that children ages 3 to 18 years were involved in the trial. And then in the beginning of the example, authors also address the potential age or development-related differences in treatment effects when they describe that ketamine clearance has been shown to be higher in younger children. But despite this, there is no current dosing recommendations that differ by age. The last example that I will address today for CONSORT-C is in the methods section again, item 13.1, and this is about the intervention and comparator. So this item extends the CONSORT 2025 item again, where authors are asked about the intervention and comparator and providing sufficient details to allow replication. And also, if relevant, where additional materials describing the intervention and comparator, such as the manual, can be accessed. In CONSORT-C for pediatric trials, we ask authors to describe whether there is an intervention dose and or a formulation that is appropriate for the trial population, and if there were any adjustments that were made based on age, weight, or body surface area. So this item is very important in pediatric trials because dosing and formulations of interventions can vary by age, weight, body surface area, or developmental stage or the disease stage of the trial population. So providing details on the intervention dose and also the formulation is really important to support replicability of trial methods in determining interventions that are acceptable, safe, and manageable for children and adolescents, and also provides insight into the tolerability of certain doses and formulations in the target population. So interventions are, well, a lot of it may be focused on medicine or drug interventions. I did want to highlight an example that is not a drug intervention to show how to report this for something that might not be like traditionally like a pharmacological intervention. This is from a trial that is published, and it's about music therapy and retinopathy of prematurity screening. So they used a recorded maternal singing and heartbeat intervention for the trial population. In the blue text here, it highlights the key elements of reporting this item. So how the dose and formulation was deemed appropriate for the trial population is addressed in the last section here at the very bottom of the example, where the loudness of the recorded intervention was adjusted based on infant's head and per music use guidelines for preterm infants. And also the example addresses how adjustments were made to the intervention dose or formulation based on the trial participant's age, weight, or body surface area, when authors describe here in the first part in the blue section here in the middle of the example, when authors describe how each intervention was tailored for each participant. So they made specific interventions and recordings for each participant with the sample of a mother's heartbeat and also the maternal lullaby singing. So this really talks about how the intervention was adjusted for the trial population. So this concludes this part of the CONSORT-C section about the different examples and how each item can be applied. For more details about the other items that were not covered today, readers and users here who are in this call are encouraged to refer to the CONSORT-C statement and also the CONSORT-C ENE. And now I would like to pass it back to Danielle for the poll. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. If you mind, I can now launch the last poll of this webinar on CONSORT-C. Of course, if you have any points or any question that arises after this intervention from Amy, please share by chat. Of course, Amy and Martin, I don't know if you have any other points that you think would be useful as a reflection, of course. Now we can also wait for the poll to have some comment on that.
Ed, you want to talk?
Yeah.
Or Ed, please.
No, sorry. It was just to pick up on your point about if we did this in a year's time, would the results be different. But actually, I find in my own institution, and this is Nottingham, but I worked in Oxford University for 20 years. The sponsor has a lot to say about the protocol template, and even though one of the main inspirations for Consort, Doug Altman, was based in Oxford, the sponsor in Oxford steadfastly refused to just endorse it and use it. So it's not just people that are unaware of, people now are aware of it. They might start using it. If you don't know about something, you can't be criticized. But sponsors and institutions should be looking at this as well, not just authors and journals, but institutions, sponsors should be saying, if somebody, or ethics committees, if something's coming in and we're sponsoring this, therefore taking a risk, it's in their interest to if they're taking a huge risk on something, to have all the information they need to make that decision. So it's everybody, it helps everybody, not just people that haven't maybe done a clinical trial yet and want to learn.
I agree.
So implementation, that it has to go right to the top.
Totally. I think there are 7 people attending today that are right on the top. So this was for you guys. Thanks, Ed. And that doesn't include well, okay, that doesn't include Karel Allegaard. He is at the top for sure.
So we can wait another minutes, 1-2 minutes more, just to let all the people finalize completing the pool. We are a little bit at the end of the webinar, so less people.
Related to the consort, I think we can summarize the most common answers is reported use rarely, related to lack of awareness as dominant, editorial actions, all the above, so in line with the previous, and so for us as well as for training, all of the above, so authors, peer reviewers, and journal offices, let's call it this way. And then the final question, more diverse answers on which action would be most effective, with the preference of mandatory journal and endorsement, likely because this is the way we function. But perhaps you have to be cautious that because some trials are not published because of other main outcome aspects or so. Thank you for your answers and your contribution to this effort, and I bring it back to Nina. I see your hands.
Thank you, Karel. I just wanted to make a generic sort of reflective point, and I'm happy to, channel out questions or comments, so do put those into the chat as well. But I think there's a real opportunity as a child and adolescent health space for all of us collectively to really use these guidelines now, both the SPIRIT and the CONSORT and the wider toolkits, to start to think about how do we sort of lift that floor of the child health research. And when I was answering some of these polls, I was thinking, I think for sort of big funded trials, the guidelines are probably quite widely used already, but we've got the much broader sort of field of informal small trials, people doing things. And I think there's a real opportunity to use these guidelines and this momentum now to think about how we're doing research in child and adolescent health, and how do we pull together and how do we share expertise about the methods, the topics, the interventions, and all of that. So yeah, maybe it's a bit of a call for action for everybody as well. Ed, you've got your hand up. Do come in.
Yeah, I wanted to applaud you. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I was thinking two things. Jennifer beautifully illustrated the importance and what the young people and parents have given to this subject. But also, I think that's one of the things that sets working with babies and children and adolescents apart, is that it's a partnership. And in trials in cardiovascular disease in 65-year-old men with heart disease, you know, the PPI side of things is less for me. This is absolutely fundamental. What are we going to do to your child? How are we going to do it? How are we going to measure it? What it means to you and your family, and what it might mean down the road, downstream, because we can maybe make a huge difference now in your child's life chances and your family's chances and economically and everything. So it is, so that the public voice is so important here. The parents, the families, you know, the caregivers. I know we know that because that's what we do, but I think it's worth saying. I also think I've had some dealings with low to middle income countries, and they say to me, what should we do with the protocol? What should we do with reporting a trial? I say, these are open access documents. We need to channel them across the world, not just in the developed world where 90% sadly of the funding goes, because people can all around the world can look at this and go, oh, I'm doing a trial in Nepal, and I can use the Spirit Child guidelines and the TIDIA guidelines for my study in Nepal or wherever. So I think we go global, because this should be open access, and hopefully that's the way, you know, we sort of, I think we are obliged to do that, really. But thank you, your comment was brilliant.
Yeah, completely agree with you, Ed. And I think, you know, as someone when I'm completing these checklists for my studies, there's always methodological gaps, but that's okay, because actually it's making that explicit. Yeah. Carol, you had your hand up. Do you want to come in? I'm conscious of time as well.
The only idea that I had Ed was making the point, but there is also some genuine interest for individual patients to improve the care of future patients. So there is a lot of philanthropy also in this part of, so it's not just for their own child and for the current care, but people also join clinical trials from a truly genuine perspective to improve practices for future patients as well. Yeah. So that's another aspect that I wanted to add to that.
No, that's really important. I heard a comment from a parent recently on a neonatal study that we're recruiting to, and this is in extreme prematurity, and they said, if 30 years ago, if parents didn't say yes to a trial like this, my baby wouldn't be alive today. And it cut me up, that did, but I just thought, absolutely amazing thing to say, that, you know, we are moving the dial, aren't we, all together?
Yeah. But on our side, it does mean that we have to do our trials as good as possible to squeeze 100%. Out as much information as we can, and that we really inform future practices. So in this way, this is a perfect fit, and I think we are at the hour. I think we have to wrap up, but actually we were already doing that, because I think this piece of information, this piece of product development is crucial to really improve our practices, to guide our practices, and in this way also improve the care of the current and the future generations of patients that we are entitled to take care of, but preferably based on a way that is well informed and is genuine and sufficiently robust. Martin or Baba, any final words on your side?
Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's close this. Thank you for your attendance. Then thank you for contributing. There were not much open questions, but I've seen that the chat was quite active and that some questions have been solved in this way. So in this way, we hope that we have been able to contribute to future better practices, and because that's why we are here, right? And have a nice continuation of your day. And in Canada, your day will be even longer than over here. So lucky you. Thank you for your attendance. Have a nice day, and hope to meet you in future activities. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
All the best.